This is Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. This is a special show because our guest is, and will be again, Maddog Hall, John Maddog Hall himself, calling in from Brazil on a line that did not hold up, unfortunately. So we will have him back. We have him for about a third of the show. So the first third of the show, he's there, and we forecast some stuff. He teed up a lot of great conversation between Dan Lynch and myself. And Dan turns out to know an awful lot about the GPL and licensing and stuff like that. That was most of the rest of the show, and it was good stuff. I think you'll enjoy it a lot. Maddog will be back, but in the meantime, that show is coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly number 754, recorded Wednesday, October 18th, 2023. Is he still on?
Listeners of this program get an ad-free version if they're members of Club TWiT. $7 a month gives you ad-free versions of all of our shows, plus membership in the Club TWiT Discord, a great clubhouse for TWiT listeners. And finally, the TWiT Plus feed, with shows like Stacy's Book Club, The Untitled Linux Show, The Giz Fizz, and more. Go to twit.tv/clubtwit, and thanks for your support.
Hello again, everyone, everywhere. This is Floss Weekly, and I am Doc Searls. This week, joined from Liverpool, Dan Lynch himself.
Hey,
back for another week of fun. Red themed as ever.
I'm kind of red themed as ever. Yeah, I'm kind of Halloween themed this week. I shouldn't.
I like that.
The benefit of those on the
says crew.
video.
Is that what it says?
Crew. So this is from an event called Og Camp, which I run, and this is a very old T-shirt. It's Og Camp 15, but it was a Halloween event, so we had an
wonderful
kind of 8-bit-ish Halloween pumpkin design for our shirts. But basically, the what happened was I had to buy 200 of these shirts for the crew. And I've got about 100 left, I think. So
yeah,
these I can wear them and throw them away and just.
That's what they call a sunk cost.
Something like that.
And you're weighed down by having 100 T-shirts in a box.
It's great though. I like them. Yeah, I do.
That's
like
a good one. That's a good one. If I'm ever over there, give me one. I need an extra large at the moment.
That's okay.
Because I'm still in my second trimester, it looks like. Anyway, so our guest today is Maddog Hall, the great and infamous and magisterial. I don't know what you get to be when you're an elder in the tribe. Older than Maddog, by the way.
You're older than Maddog, right? Okay. Yeah. I did say to someone in the chat before we started this show that I would enjoy being the young buck this week.
Yes, you are.
I'm a mere 43 years old, so I feel like the young buck, which is nice. Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to talk to Maddog because we've never spoken in person, but I've seen him speak a lot of times, and I feel like I've kind of conversed with him in a way, although it's more one way. He was talking at me, but I enjoyed it. Hopefully we'll enjoy chatting to each other.
Well, let's, so I want to introduce him. John Maddog Hall, Maddog all lowercase, is one of the originals, pre-Linux, post-Linux, more involved with Linux and with Linus himself than anybody else that I know, or that anybody knows. A committed, capable, and even charismatic leader for us in the community. And he's back. He's been with us before, but he's back for a return engagement. We like to have the best of our guests back. So welcome to the show, Maddog.
Thank you very much, Doc. I'm very excited about this. Actually,
we are too, and so is our back channel. I should for those of you watching, which is a minority of you, but some of you, the reason that Maddog is very still in the picture is because we don't want to risk losing him on a fairly tenuous connection in Brazil. So start by telling us what you're doing in Brazil. I know you spend a lot of time there. You're really committed to the community there. What's going on?
Well, I mean, right now I'm at an event called Latino Wear. It's been going on for 20 years. It is major sponsored by the TWiT, which is one of the largest hydroelectric plants in the world. And another side of that is PTI, which is a research group that's associated with TWiT. And 20 years ago, some people started saying, hey, you guys should be supporting free software. So they started up this event called Latinoware. And it's very well positioned because it's right at the border of three countries, Paraguay, Brazil, and Argentina. In fact, the three countries come together right here. And so we have a lot of university students from all three countries come here. They come in what they call caravans, and they could travel for like 15 or 20 hours in a caravan to come to Latinoware and listen to speakers and just enjoy each other's company and things like that. We also get a lot of students who are into computer science who aren't necessarily into free software. They've heard about it, but they want to get more exposure. So this is a very good event to come to. And I have been coming for over 20 years. Actually, for 20 years. This is the 20th anniversary. And I enjoy coming here. I enjoy talking with the students, things like that. So now, how did I get involved with Latin America? I first visited Caracas, Venezuela in 1994, which I can assume that some of your listeners are always going, 1994? Oh my goodness. It's such a long time ago. True. And but I was there because of ADICAS, the Digital Equipment Corporation User Society, was having a meeting in Caracas. And I got exposed to Latin America. And 2 years later, in 1996, I went to Sao Paulo. And a lot of people in the United States, when you say Latin America, they think of the Amazon, or they think of Piranha, or Samba, or something like that. But they don't really connect with the fact that Sao Paulo is the second largest city in the Western Hemisphere after only Mexico City, with New York being kind of far down the line. And they don't connect with the fact that the University of Sao Paulo has 100,000 students and 16,000 PhDs. So if you're interested in almost anything, there's a person at the University of Sao Paulo who is passionate about it. And it was at the University of Sao Paulo in 1996 I saw my first Beowulf supercomputer in real life.
Oh, wow.
And they were doing some amazing things. And so I started working with the university, and from there, a lot of other countries. So I kind of concentrated more in Latin America than I did in Europe or China or the Asian countries, although I still went there too. So right now, I'll maybe skip ahead a little bit. I'm working on two projects in Latin America. One of them is called Caninos Loucos, which stands for Crazy Canines, kind of as a tip of the hat to me, maddog. And the project is about designing and manufacturing and distributing little, basically single-board computers, something along the lines of the Raspberry Pi. But it's slightly different. It has two boards to it. One is a board that has the CPU, the GPU, the memory, the flash, everything. And the other is what we call the I/O board that has the connectors attached to it, does power management, things like that. We actually have three board boards. One is 32-bit, one is 64-bit, that is pin-for-pin compatible with the 32-bit board. And the other is the 64-bit board that has additional data lines for the RAM, so you can have more memory on it than you can have with the first two boards. But all three boards fit into a DIMM socket, standard DIMM socket, so that you can slip one board out, stick the other one in, change the operating system, and not have to replace your I/O board. So we started on this project a number of years ago. Pardon?
Sorry, no, I was just saying that sounds really interesting. It reminds me a little bit of something like the Freedom Box, possibly. Is that any relation?
Well, the Freedom Box is actually software that can run on a wide variety of different pieces of hardware.
Mm-hmm.
And this is hardware that basically we have Debian as the operating system that we chose to concentrate on. Although we would welcome other distributions of Linux on it, that would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
We would even, I'm going to have to joke on this, we would even welcome Microsoft on it if they thought that this was worthwhile doing.
Uh-huh.
But they haven't offered us anything yet, so we're really quite happy with Debian. And on top of this, we're building different types of applications. So one of our applications is to port Odoo on top of this, and then allow students to be able to sell this to small business people. So instead of a small business person having to shell out all the money for SAP or for Oracle Enterprise or Oracle ERP, they could get this little Labrador system with the Odoo code on it, buy a printer, a cashier, or scale, scanner, and actually create a point-of-sale ERP system for a fraction of the cost of either SAP or Oracle. And by making this available to students to do this, then the students can actually have a job that could help to pay their way through university without having to flip hamburgers or be a clerk at a night clerk at a hotel. Not that there's anything wrong with those jobs. It's just the students are typically going to university to learn that. So these are the types of projects that we're working on in conjunction with Caninos Loucos. You showed another little computer there, something about the size of a quarter. That is a sensor computer that we're building. It's using an ARM microcontroller on that, but it still has the same design characteristics that one board has the CPU, the GPU, and all the high-speed components, and the other board is I/O, usually Wi-Fi, LoRaWAN, or Bluetooth as the I/O thing. And we can run that board, that little computer, for about 6 months on a watch battery.
On a wow.
So that's it. Yeah. So it's a sensor computer. It gathers up information, turns on its transmitter, transmits it, and then some other computer, maybe our little Labrador, gathers that information, condenses it, and sends it on to the next place. And we were going to call that small computer a Chihuahua, but then we realized everybody hates Chihuahuas, so we named it Pulga instead, which Pulga is Portuguese for flea, and all dogs have fleas. So
that's true. That is very interesting. So, Mad Dog, I wanted to ask you about. Well, actually, it leads right in with some of the back channel chat we were just having between me and Doc there. You mentioned the M word, Microsoft, and it feels a bit like the elephant in the room is that we did all live through the days of Linux as a cancer and all of that, which I don't want to get too into. But I'm just wondering how you feel about Microsoft's position now in the open source kind of space. It feels like maybe they've changed a little bit. Is that fair, do you think? Where do you kind of stand on that?
Okay. So I will tell you that you say we all lived through that. I have whip marks on my back that I got from Microsoft. Okay. I was thrown out of conferences because I was trying to hand out CDs of free software. I was not only thrown out of the conference, I was thrown out of the building. I was told I couldn't even just stand out on the street and give them away, that they were going to call the cops. Now, granted, that was a whole long time ago when Steve Ballmer was still yelling, developers. But I will also point out that Microsoft only talks about how much they love open source. Now, I'm going to differentiate between open source, which includes licenses like MIT and BSD, where you get a whole bunch of code which you can use, and then you can change it to meet your needs, but you don't have to redistribute the source code for your changes when you create your binaries. So the end user still gets a bunch of binaries that they can't change. They can't hire somebody, a third party, to change it for them. They may as well just be getting closed source. The only one that benefits from the open source is the developer or the company that's distributing it. Free software, on the other hand, is a reciprocal license, or some people call it copyleft, which says you have to make your changes available to the customer. And not only that, but the latest versions of the GPL say you also have to make any type of special build information available to them so they can actually change the code or support it over time if you lose interest in it. And people say, oh, maddog, I don't have the expertise to do that. But you could hire somebody who has the expertise to do that. And to point out where this might be practically useful is that Microsoft stopped supporting XP years ago. And that was when millions of people were still using XP. But even now, we estimate that about 12 million people are still using XP. They can't put it to new hardware. They can't have new device drivers for it. They can't have any types of bug fixes. They can't extend it. 12 million people. If XP was open source, those 12 million people could form a little community, hire some programmers, and there's lots of companies that would love to have 12 million people on a support contract. But they can't because they don't
it
have
makes me think a bit of the whole
for XP.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but it makes me think a bit of the whole embrace, extend, extinguish approach that we saw from some companies.
Well, I'm going to be my rare form of being fair to Microsoft. I used to work with Digital Equipment Corporation. I am very well aware of the engineering process where you hire a bunch of engineers and they produce a product, and then they support that product, and another group of engineers decides the next release, and they support that. But sooner or later, that first group of engineers, as the number of people using that product decreases, you want to take those engineers and put them on the next version. You don't want to have them keep supporting this older and older and older version. So I understand the business model, but that doesn't change the fact that there's still an estimated 12 million people using Microsoft XP that they don't dare put these systems on the internet. They don't, and like I said, they can't get new hardware. They're stuck with it. Maybe they have an application that only works on XP. It's a binary application written for XP. It's the only thing it runs on. They can't move.
Yeah.
So
no, go on.
This is a problem. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is, for years, people like O'Reilly have been welcoming Microsoft to come to open source events or free software events. And they come and they give talks and they tell how great they are. But as far as I know, there's never been a single time that Richard Stallman has been invited to speak to a Microsoft users group. He has been invited to talk to their research group. That doesn't count. He should be invited to talk to a Microsoft users group so he can tell them why they should be using free software. And I would estimate that after Richard Stallman told Microsoft user group why they should be using free software, he did that only one time, Microsoft will only have half their customers left. But that doesn't happen. And Microsoft doesn't love Linux. They love free software. They love open source. Oracle doesn't love. They really don't. They don't love free software. They love something that benefits them.
Well, this is sort of a natural corporate behavior to some degree. But I want to take a break now and go a little bit deeper into what we're talking about now, especially pulling apart how licenses work, and you were mentioning that earlier. So let's take a quick break now. We'll be back after this. Okay, so so Dan, if I'm not mistaken, we're coming out of the break without the guest, and
we've lost the guest.
Our beloved guest, maddog himself. A power outage or some other glitch has happened, and he has disappeared, at least for the interim, while our production team labors in the background and makes stuff work.
I don't know if I should say this, but I really just hope he didn't run into Steve Ballmer or something, didn't turn up down there.
I don't know. It's interesting. So we were on the subject of Microsoft, and you asked a really good question about, is Microsoft like the good guy now? And maddog is busy saying, well, they were so bad.
Yeah, they were
for so long. It's kind of hard to wait a minute. You guys got reformed, and he was making this great distinction between free software and open source, and really sharing and participating in a community, and simply deriving the benefits of open source. And when we didn't go any farther with that, I was suggesting that it might have something to do with the GPL license,
the copyleft element,
the copyleft element, because I'm remembering it was Craig Burton. I'll say who it was. He's gone now, sadly. He would have been a great guest. Another late convert to open source, actually, and to free software, who, when he was still at Novell, and almost single-handedly responsible for the success of Novell back in the 80s and early 90s. He'd long since left it by this time, though. When I was talking to him about the GPL, he said, I don't know what to do with that. And I'm wondering how much of it is, I don't know what to do with that, versus I do know what to do with something that's free for the taking, and I don't know, I don't have to worry about anything else. And so what do you think about that? I mean,
I think it's really interesting that I think a lot of it needs to be tested in court. I mean, I'm definitely not a lawyer by anyone's stretch of the imagination. Certainly not an American lawyer. I know we have different laws between our two nations, but it does seem to me that like a lot of this stuff needs to be tested in court a bit more still, that in terms of enforcing copyleft. It's happened. There have been cases. There have been large scale cases, some involving friends of mine who back in the days of the Software Freedom Law Center, if you remember them. I think they're still going, actually. I say if you remember them. But they're still going, Eben Moglin and all of those kind of people. I was a little bit involved with them, helping out with podcasts of all things. But they were actually taking test cases like TV manufacturers who bundle the Linux kernel and some things like BusyBox, which is a kind of cut down version of the GNU toolchain, if I understand rightly. And they were using embedded Linux with BusyBox on smart TVs and not contributing back to the community and not making the source available for what they've done and all the things that the copyleft licenses require, because they were under GPL v2. And they were prosecuting that, but I don't know the actual outcome of the case, which is bad. I should know, but it went on for a very long time. And sadly, I think there's a large thing where you've got a small entity, like a BusyBox is only a couple of guys, I think, or guys or gals. I don't mean to use that in a but they would struggle to fight the legal department of a Microsoft, Google, Sun, sadly no more, or whoever it may be, IBM, because their lawyers are so, they've got so many lawyers, they've got so many good lawyers, they can just throw lots of money at it and make you give up, I think is the problem. So it's just an interesting one. I think it's not a fair fight in a lot of ways in terms of legally, but I do think that the precedents are probably there for more of these cases to come up and for copyleft to be more enforced. I don't know if you've seen any of that kind of stuff, Doc, or have you? I
haven't. I'm kind of almost allergic to legal stuff in the sense that I tend to get snowed under. I mean, I'm not. My mind is not built for that. Often in legal work, though certainly in programming, I'm not a programmer either. The only code I know is Morse, but. In much the same way that you, as in programming, you have to remember a lot of conditionalities. You're full of logic, ifs, thens, or else's, and the rest of it. And What I'm looking at, what I'm kind of hoping to get some insight on, it doesn't have to be from you or me. I was hoping Mad Dog could provide it, but maybe our back channel, which is listening, can provide it. I don't know. Yeah. Is in the market. I mean, I think what Craig Burton said to me with I don't know what to do with that is just like I'm speaking as him now. I stumble over this conditionality that the freedom this has to be given to others as well. And even understanding that there's a freedom to do a bunch of other things other than simply use and reuse or make your own in some way. And there's another aspect to this, which is a very human thing, which is to use a resource without recognizing the consequences of it. Was watching last night the new Ken Burns documentary on the buffalo. The buffalo was the most abundant large animal in North America at the point when the Europeans arrived and were driven almost to extinction, and not just by the immigrants, but by the natives as well, to a lesser degree. But they were more respectful of them. But the fact was there was a gigantic market for buffalo everything, and we don't want to be political here, but I don't think this is a scientific matter. Pretty much, I mean, humans tend to use things that they can when it's free and available, and they can just carve it away. In England, they basically clear cut forests to make ships, and then this is just true everywhere. We just tend to use what's available when it's not complicated. And the GPL seems complicated to people, I think. And I'm not sure it's malevolent in every case, I guess is what I'm saying. But it's certainly not. It takes some mental effort to understand why it is that the GPL and copyleft are actually good for business. I mean, this is something that Eric Raymond wrote a lot about back in the decade.
I was just going to mention Eric Raymond on that.
Yeah, he did a really good job of that because he's a hardcore free market libertarian on the one hand. On the other, he's very much an advocate for, and a pragmatist as well. I mean, he was not so much against free software, he was against the label. And some of the doctrinal insistences that the free software movement had. But
I suppose the thing is, though, I mean, to take the devil's advocate point of view, if you like, which is a little.
There are no devils, so it would help.
Exactly, yeah. So somebody like an Eric Raymond, for example, who I don't know, I've never met, but I heard speak and I've read some of his writing. I believe that his position would be that the freedom not to give others freedom is a freedom. Does that make any sense? So you make something and you not to enforce other people to share that. So the ultimate freedom is to give someone something and not expect anything back. It would be maybe his point of view or the point of view that I've heard, but I don't know that I necessarily agree with that person.
Well, when I'll have to go back and look at it. I spent a lot of time. He stayed at our house. I knew Eric really well for a long time, but we haven't talked to each other in quite a while as well. But my understanding of it, and again, I'm subject to correction on this, is that what the GPL did was it kind of held Linux together. And it held the community together. There was something about copyleft as well as strategically that is part of the reason that Linux succeeded in ways that, say, BSD did not. And where GPL products have a way of succeeding that we don't see with the MIT or the BSD or the more permissive licenses. And I know from having dealt with a lot of companies, when I ask, what license are you using? Oh, we're using MIT license because it works for us. It's simple. They didn't think about it, and there was no thinking involved. But maybe in some cases there was thinking involved. I don't know. There are a great many cases, and
there's also the whole patent side of things, because some friends of mine who are involved in this kind of legal space, educated me on the fact that the Apache 2 license was one of the first permissive licenses to actually deal with patent matters as well. So it's an interesting one. I don't know whether it would be classed as this is where we need Simon, isn't it? Simon Phipps. I don't know if it would be classed as a free software license, Apache 2, but I think it might be. Or I certainly know some of my friends who are free software advocates and copyleft advocates still say that at least Apache 2, which was a Google favorite for a very long time, does have patent provision, which some don't. And I'm getting into legal stuff again, so I can see you getting antsy there, Doc. I don't want you to worry. I'm going to get.
No, I'm not antsy at all. I was thinking of a lot of times what we do is we work with what's familiar to us. I mean, there's one project I know of right now that where the developer told me that they're using an Apache license because he's an Apache guy. He worked on Apache. He was in the community. He was very active in it, as a matter of fact. And so it's familiar. It's just he inherited it, as it were, for this. Yeah, we're doing the Apache license. Why? Well, because that's what I use. It's kind of like like we always ask at the end of the show, or your choice of text editor and scripting language is why I like Python. That's what I always use, right? So there it is. I like Bash.
Sorry, Doc, I'm cutting in on you, but I just could mention the fact that in our chat here, our IRC chat that we have going along during the show, they've been talking. You were talking about buffalo and bison, and they're talking about bison, but it all links back in because all I can think of is GNU. Because that's the whole. Oh,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a you had the Bison project. You had other things that came out of GNU. There was a reason, I think, why Richard Stallman maybe chose that as the logo. I don't know. Just. I wonder if
I haven't. I'm looking at the back channel. I've got a bunch of loquacious and then it ended. So maybe I missed that one. Yeah. For those who don't know, bison and buffalo are the same. There are a number of different kinds of buffalo, including the water buffalo or the GNU. Is the GNU water buffalo?
I think it might be, yeah.
I think it might be, yeah.
I can tell you that in France, I don't speak a lot of French, although I lived there for a very short period of time. I tried, but I wasn't great at French. But I did learn. There was a guy who had a farm nearby, and he had bison on the farm. And I learned that the French for bison is bison.
Really? That would totally make sense.
Yeah, it's bison.
It's the same spelling, just different.
Yeah, it's just bison.
The emphasis on the final syllable in the French way. I worked in France for short periods in the mid 90s, never long enough to pick up the language. And I wanted to. I'd sit in the metro going somewhere with my Larousse, and I would look at the words in ads that are in the subway, and I think, okay, I'm going to memorize 20 words a day. And after 2 weeks, I'm getting there, and the next day I'd remember voiture and valise and a couple of other words, but that are simple and nothing else. It didn't stick because I was already getting old,
it's a difficult
the mind doesn't absorb that quickly.
Yeah, it can be a difficult language to learn, but it's really interesting that people are discussing this. There are so many links back to the kind of subject of copyleft and so on, and licensing. I mean, although I'm definitely, as I say, once again, not a lawyer, this does not constitute legal advice in any fashion. But I do love licenses. I'm a bit of a license geek. So not in as much as, say, someone like Simon, our esteemed co-host. But yeah. But
you two could be our designated license geeks. I'm
an amateur enthusiast.
Well, I have that. I look at effects. I mean, to me, that's the interesting thing is like, where did this work and why did it work? And was it so much the particulars of the license or the habits of people who are already in it or moral sympathies or all the above? Linus chose the GPL in the first place for, I think, strategic reasons. And, but he also, for strategic reasons, he did not go with the GPL 3.
I have some stories about that, which I will
go tell one. Actually, let's do it after a break. We'll take a quick break and then come back with with one of those stories. Back after this. Is this working, guys? I think it is.
I think it's working. I'm happy. I don't know. We're back.
Okay, we're back. So go ahead with one of those stories.
We were talking about licensing and the GPL v2 and the GPL v3. I had the privilege of being at, you may have even been there, Doc. I was at the first Linux Con in Portland in 2009.
I was not there. I was at Linux Worlds. I was at several of those.
Okay. So this was the Linux Foundation's equivalent one. They called it Linux Con. I was at the first one anyway. And I was with my friend Bradley, who we talked about before. And he was at the time very much trying to, because he was heavily involved in drafting GPL v3. And there were a number of kernel developers, very prominent kernel developers, people the likes of Ted Cho, for example. Obviously,
right. He lived up there. Yeah.
One of the best introductions I've ever seen for somebody. So Ted gave a talk. I met him through Bradley, and again, this was like, to me, he was like, "Oh my God, I'm meeting Ted Cho. You know, this guy's incredible." But he was introduced on stage at LinuxCon as the man who's lost more of your data than anyone else.
Because he was the file system, right?
He made the ext file system, which is now ext4, which is still the default on most Linux distributions. But at the time, it was very much the default. But yeah, he was introduced for his keynote as the man who's lost more of your data than anyone else, which was good. But on the whole GPL v3 thing, because I was with Bradley, he was going around and talking to people like Ted about moving the kernel to v3, and Linus was there, or Linus, I should say, because that's how he pronounces it. And I actually got to meet him as well. So I met him very briefly. He was getting a coffee. So everybody was, because it was Linus, it's Linus Torvalds, and you're at a Linux event, people are going to swamp him. So yeah, it was just that I ended up having a privilege of meeting him and getting him to sign a program for me, which we gave away on the podcast as a gift. Sorry, as a prize, not a gift. For the listeners, which was really fantastic. But I did overhear a lot of conversations about why the GPL v3 was made.
And Mad Dog is back. I see him.
I see him too. Can you hear us?
Okay, so it's 2023 and technology is still imperfect, and we lost Mad Dog for the second time. And so let's carry on with where you were going already, Dan, with your story in Portland.
Yeah, so
with Linus and Ted.
Yeah, of course. So Linus wasn't. So I should recap for people in case they're joining us at this point. Very quickly, I was in Portland, in Oregon, of course, in the US of A, for LinuxCon 2009, the first one, where I got to meet Linus Torvalds for all of 5 minutes. You very graciously don't make it sound like I was having a drink with Linus and Ted and we were all hanging out, but Linus wasn't there for that part. But I did meet him and get him to sign something for me, and he was very, very nice to me, which I was a bit not surprised about, but because he can be quite short with people on the Linux kernel developers lists and stuff. I wasn't sure whether he'd be happy for someone to come up to him and go, "Oh, can you sign this for me?" But he was great. So we were talking about GPL v3. I was with a friend of mine who was trying to convince Ted Cho, who's a kernel developer, file system developer, formerly a Cerberus developer, I believe, which I was told to ask him about by a friend of mine, about moving the kernel, the Linux kernel, from GPL v2, which it currently is under, to GPL v3, which is obviously a newer version of said license, a copyleft license, which links into our earlier discussion. And it was really interesting to experience that, because the impression I got was that many of the kernel developers whose conversations I overheard were actually very positive about the idea of moving to GPL v3. They actually liked the idea because what happened with V2, the argument was that, Linus chose GPL v2 all those years ago. It's a license from like 1991, I believe. So even in 2009, it was quite out of date, and it didn't have provisions for patents. It didn't have things that had since developed to become a problem for free software and open source software. So they were quite positive about it, but it never happened, which was a real shame. And I didn't think that it would, but because the issue with the kernel, which you may be able to speak to as well, Doc, is that the copyright is retained by the individual developers. So the lines that they contribute to the kernel, often, unless it's on behalf of a company, there are lots of individual people out there who are kernel developers who have little bits of copylefted, I should say, code in the kernel, and they would all need to agree for there to be a license change. And I don't think they will ever fully agree. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't have thoughts. I more have like, see, I don't have thoughts. I have opinions. There's an important difference. Where I go with this is that a lot of great work and thought, and I love and respect Evan Moglen a lot. He's and the same goes for RMS and goes for Bradley and all of the fully principled people out there that are, and I know them, and I'm one of those ones on privacy. I just think that any kind of surveillance, unwanted surveillance, is wrong on its face, and so I kind of stand for that. What's interesting to me is that, from both a development perspective and a business perspective, as a second order of the development, is why something succeeds. When we started Linux Journal, all hail Phil Hughes, who started Linux Journal. It was going to be Free Software Journal, and I don't know if he did have some disagreement with Richard, but I don't know what it was. But then Richard has lots of disagreements with lots of people, and who knows, right? I have tapes of interviews with him, which are just so interesting, and someday we'll go somewhere with them. But at some point when we were talking, we had this email round thread, and this is when I hate to admit my email was with AOL at that time. This is back in early 90s, because I couldn't get on the internet yet, and internet there were no ISPs I could get on, and I wasn't at a university or a big company, and I also had a CompuServe one, so whatever worked, and we went around about starting a free software magazine. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Phil said, Linux is it. I know this kid. There's this kid from Finland. He's got this thing. It's going to be at 1.0 soon. I want to come out with the magazine when it hits 1.0. And that was in April of 94. And he saw something in Linux, in where Linux was coming from, that was, let's build it on this. This will succeed. And it was an awesome call. But was what he saw in there the GPL, or was it just that he saw a lot of developers lining up around it? And was that because the GPL was involved or not? I think it was. I think the GPL had a lot to do with it, but I don't know the specifics of how that happened. I do know that Linus was very adamant about not going with the GPL3, and he got into arguments with I don't know, directly with Eben or with Bradley or anybody else involved, but the reasons you give are plausible ones. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, so the reasons, the things that I overheard or was privileged to overhear were arguments about things like patent provision and the fact that under the GPL v3, once again, I am no kind of lawyer, and this does not constitute legal advice. I have to keep saying that because my lawyer friends all do this. Whenever they go, they say something, they preface it with, "This does not constitute legal advice," so that it's like signing a waiver. Anyway, and also another friend of mine who is a lawyer told me that if you ask a lawyer a direct question, the answer will always be maybe, because they're never going to give you an actual answer, because
another question. Or another question about your question.
Yeah, exactly. So but it was really interesting. So the GPL v3 has exceptions, what they call exceptions in it, and it's kind of like modules of a license. So if you think of it in software terms, you're choosing which clauses you want to invoke in the license. So when you license something under GPL v3, which I haven't done, I may be completely wrong on this. I understand that what you can do is use the clauses to say, I want this. It's a bit like Creative Commons. I want it to be share alike or copy left. I want it to be non-commercial. I want it to be commercial. All those things. You can almost kind of tailor the license a bit more to be what you want it to be, rather than just being stuck with GPL v2, which was written like a big monolithic thing. That was that was it.
That is interesting. I'm involved in something like this right now with a standard we're baking for IEEE. The IEEE, which is very much a corporate entity working for companies, made a decision and invited me in and other people in on this to to work on standards that work for people and not just for companies. And so we're working on one called P7012, for machine readable personal privacy terms. And the big thing we're looking at right now is what we want to have the things say is something like what you're talking about with GPL3 and that we have with Creative Commons, which is you can pick a bunch of different agreements that you're going to lay on companies. I mean, one would be, for example, don't track me anywhere under any circumstances, or track me only on site here and give none of that information to anybody else, or go ahead and show me ads, just make sure they're not based on tracking me. That actually is a written agreement, and it was written by Harvard Law School for us. And as one of the possible things, but there would be like not that many variants of it. They would all be basically privacy terms, because privacies are basically, I mean, a privacy statement is what you wish other people to know or not know, or do or not do. And it should be fairly simple and straightforward. And maybe we should be looking at the GPL3 and the provisions that are in that. That would be an interesting.
It might be one to
look at it.
We've got a little bit of a question from Loquacious, who's in the IRC. It's not a question as such, but kind of. They're asking whether you can sell something that's under GPL v3 or even v2. And as you and I both know, Doc, you can definitely sell. You can
sell whatever you want, right?
Yeah,
I can sell you a bottle of air. Right here it is.
Yeah, exactly. But the license itself does not prevent you from selling and profiting from the sale of the software. So it's about adding value. If I sell you a piece of software that's on I'm trying to think of a good example, on a USB flash drive, right? You want some software. This is an old school real world thing. You're not downloading it. You come to me. I say, here's the software. It's under GPL. And I can sell it to you, but I have to also provide you with the source to the software. If it's a compiled piece of software, it's a binary blob or anything like that, I have to also allow you to see the source code, to improve the source code, to learn from it, the 4 freedoms that they talk about.
Right.
That's where that comes in, because you have to be able to see the source. You have the right to study. You have the right to modify, as long as you contribute back your modifications under the same license. So if you are a customer and you make smart TVs, again is the example, and I say, here you go, Linux embedded system for you here, that'll do what you want. And the Linux kernel itself is under GPL v2, which requires copyleft. So if you, some large TV manufacturers, who I won't name, in many countries around the world, have been selling TVs with embedded Linux operating systems and never providing any of the source code for the customizations that they've made. And they are clearly making a lot of money out of it. They're legally allowed to do that. There's nothing against it in the license. What they're not allowed to do is then keep the changes that they've made to themselves and not contribute them back to the community.
It's an interesting one. The Sony Bravia 1K TV that we bought, I guess it was like $2,000, something like that, in 2006, came along with the instructions a 2-page printout of the GPL saying, we have to provide you with this, our lawyers say, because we have to live with this. This is here. And but then nothing like what you just said, no evidence that whatever modifications they made with that. And I'm pretty sure pretty much everything since then is running on Linux. And I'm not sure anybody, many of those are doing any of this, and worse on the privacy side, they're all spying on you at this point.
There was a big case with airlines, because, airlines have their onboard entertainment systems where they have a screen in the back of the seat and you can watch films, you can, do whatever you're going to do. Most of those run on Linux. They run on a Linux media server system. Not exactly embedded. It might be a server somewhere on the plane, which has, a lot of video files on it for all the different films that people might want to watch, or TV programs, or whatever it is. And that's all done from Linux. And there's been high profile cases where the aviation companies have not complied with the GPL over things like their entertainment systems, which is just.
I have somewhere, I shot with a phone, the I don't know, is it Debian screen or what, when the entertainment system on a plane failed, there's the little penguin and a whole bunch of text.
Kernel panic. So Very quickly, years ago, I had an episode of Linux Outlaws, the podcast I was on. One of the very early episodes we did was because I'd been on a plane and seen just that, but it was a kernel panic, and it came up on the screen, kernel panic, and I was like, kernel panic at 3,000 foot in the air. I don't think I like the sound of that. The episode was called...
I know. It's like, if that's all that fails, you just wonder if it's tied in with everything else. Oh my God. It's a
Mr. Searls, I've seen that screen, and it always reminded me of like Knoppix. You remember Knoppix? Run from the CD, and I would pull that up and was like, wait a minute, hold on, this is on the plane, this is running the plane. Should I be concerned?
I know, it's like, I know. There's United, to their enormous credit, and it's one of the things I loved about them, had this feature called From the Flight Deck, and you could listen into the chatter between the pilots and the ground. And especially if you're going through turbulence, it's very reassuring, because you listen to it and they clearly don't care, or they're just completely stoic about it, and which basically is their training. But it's incredibly interesting, but they've dropped that in most of their planes at this point, which is sad. But yeah, I wondered when I've seen that. But the thing is that the entertainment system routinely fails in all planes. They're just bad. They're
not just the entertainment system, though. How many times have you been to an airport and seen, the flight board where they put the flights and it's got a blue screen?
And that used to fail to Windows.
That's what I mean. It would be like a blue screen of death.
It was people who published on the BSOD, forums. So we're at wrap time. So maybe you already told us what your favorite text editor and scripting language. I have, since you're not a guest.
I'm happy to tell you again very quickly. My favorite scripting languages are Bash and Python, and that's pure personal. And I use, and this is where I'm kind of glad that I don't have to make myself ashamed in front of MacBreak here. I mostly use Visual Studio Code, which is open source, and it's a Microsoft product, but it's fully open source, and it's really good. And I feel kind of guilty about it, but it's good. That's all I can say.
Well, we've had.
There we go.
But we've had Miguel Diaz on here, who reached out from the open source community. He loved C#. He loved what they were doing with whatever their sort of larger effort was around that. Ended up working there for a period of time. There are good people doing good work there. There's no doubt about it, including people who started in the Linux world. So next week, well, you do your plugs while I look up who's on next week.
No problem.
And
no problem. So so if you want to find out anything about what I'm up to, you can go to danlynch.org, which is in the lower third for people watching the video. And Ant's very kindly put up a lovely picture. That's me in my cowboy hat. That's a genuine Texan Stetson that my friend got for me from. She is Texan. She's a Texan, and she brought me a Texan hat, and I was like, that's amazing. So yeah, you can find music on there. You can find podcasts. You can go to danlynch.org/music if you want to find music. You can go to my very out-of-date blog. There's a blog on there, which I haven't updated in about a year, I think, at this point. So I will need to do that. You can buy the music on Bandcamp. You can listen to it for free on Bandcamp. You're welcome to steal it. Don't worry about it. It's under Creative Commons. It's not stealing. It's actually licensed in the copyleft theme. It's licensed under Creative Commons attribution share alike. So go and enjoy that.
There's a forum I've recently joined called something like Abandoned Indiana, and it's old places in Indiana that have been abandoned one way or another. And I was thinking there ought to be one of abandoned blogs, like good abandoned blogs. Our legacy abandoned, they're still up, and somebody's still paying for that domain name. Some of mine have been like that for a while, but they're still there. Next week we have Frank Karlczyk. He's from Nextcloud, and that's Next and Cloud.
Oh, I know Frank. Sorry.
Oh, great.
Well, I've met him. He won't know who I am. I've met him at a conference. Yes, he's very.
Jonathan penciled in right now as the guest
Jonathan
host, but
will do a great job. Yeah,
but
Jonathan.
If we bring you back, we could have you 3 weeks in a row. Which might be a new record.
Might be a new record. But I think Jonathan will have.
I'm sure he will. So that's coming up next week. And so in the meantime, thanks everybody. Thank you, Mad Dog, wherever you are. We'll have you back. We have openings here and there, and we'll have you back when you're home on your 2 megabit enviable in each direction fiber connection and
2 gigabit.
You're 2 gigabit. I'm sorry.
megabit.
Yeah. Now megabit. No, that would be bad. That would be very bad. We've had that before. That didn't work. That's probably what he was on in Brazil anyway. So we'll do that. And in the meantime, see everybody. See you next week.
It's midweek, and you really want to know even more about the world of technology.
So you should check out Tech News Weekly, the show where we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news.
It's the biggest news. We talk with the people writing the stories that you're probably reading. We also talk between ourselves about the stories that are getting us even more excited about tech news this week.
So if you're excited, well, then join us. Head to twit.tv/TNW to subscribe.